Hello students, I'm back on Facebook Live giving you a lesson in answer to a student question. Someone asked, how should I use the verbs recommend and suggest correctly? So I'm going to tell you about that today and give you some more phrases that you can use for making recommendations and suggestions. I hear a lot of my students make the mistake of saying, I recommend you to take. For example, it's raining today, so we should take an umbrella when we go out, right? But don't say, I recommend you to take an umbrella, or I suggest you to take an umbrella. That's just not correct in English. I know that in maybe your native language, it might be okay to use to take in this case, but in English, we don't say it that way. So how should we say it correctly? There are a couple of different ways. You can use the ing form of the verb immediately after recommend or suggest. So you can say, it's raining outside, I recommend taking an umbrella, or I suggest taking an umbrella. That's correct. Or you can use this structure. I recommend that you take an umbrella, or I suggest that you take an umbrella. Those are correct as well. And some native English speakers will actually eliminate the word that and say, I recommend you take an umbrella, or I suggest you take an umbrella. That's okay to say too. All right, so now you've got a few different correct ways to use recommend and suggest. Don't use the to, use taking, the ing form, or use I suggest that you take, or I suggest you take an umbrella. Now, we can also make recommendations using other phrases that don't actually use the phrase or the word recommend or suggest. For example, a really simple way is to say you should or you shouldn't. For example, it's rainy today, you should take an umbrella. Or it's very cold, you shouldn't wear shorts, right? That would be a negative recommendation, something I'm telling you not to do. So, 4 phrases for you. I recommend taking, I recommend or suggest that you take, and you should, you shouldn't. Now, you should and you shouldn't are very direct phrases. They're almost a little bit commanding, like you are saying, I know what's best for the other person. And there are certain situations where you might not want to use them. For example, if you're talking to someone who you don't know very well, or if you're talking to your boss or a coworker in a professional situation, sometimes it's not appropriate to directly say, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. Okay, so in those situations, you can use recommend and suggest. Those would be appropriate. Or here's another one. You can say you might want to, or you might not want to. For example, let's say your boss is going to make a decision and you don't agree with his decision. You think he is making the decision too quickly and that it's going to have bad results. Well, it's not so good to say directly to your boss, you should do this, or you shouldn't make that decision. It's just too much, you're putting too much authority on yourself. So instead, you can say, you might want to, or you might not want to. For example, when talking to your boss, you might want to think it over a little more. Think it over means to think about that in more detail or for a longer time. Or you can say, you might not want to make that decision right away. You're still giving your suggestion, giving your recommendation, but now you're doing it in a softer and more polite way. Okay? So these are your phrases for making recommendations and making suggestions. Remember not to use this structure because it's not correct. So English grammar has a lot of these little details, right? There are some things that might seem correct when you think about it in your native language, but in English they're not correct, or native English speakers wouldn't say it that way. We would say it differently. But it's difficult to know when you're studying English if you're making these kind of mistakes or if your sentences are okay. So if you'd like to get my feedback and my correction, I have a course called Advanced English Grammar, and it will teach you all these little details of English grammar. We do all the verb tenses, prepositions, adverbs, adjectives, more advanced sentence structures, everything in English grammar, or almost everything. And at the end of each lesson, there's an opportunity for you to send me your writing based on what you learned in the lesson, and then I'll correct it and send it back to you with my comments. I'll correct any mistakes and change anything that is different from the way a native English speaker would say it, so that you can improve your writing and improve your overall grammar and sentence structure. Because that way you can speak confidently, right? When you know that you're using the right phrases, you can say them with more confidence. So make sure to check out the Advanced English Grammar course. And I have one more thing for you to do today. Leave a comment on this video. Let's imagine that you have a friend who's learning English, and your friend is they don't have the confidence to speak in English. They're afraid to try speaking in English, and you want to help this friend. So what are one or two recommendations or suggestions you would give to someone who's afraid to speak in English? Leave a comment under this video and use one of the phrases you learned today. Okay? I look forward to reading your comments, and I'll talk to you next time.